All right, Julie, it's kind of one of my favorite topics. The influencers come up sometimes in a second, sometimes in a lifetime, and so on. And when I speak, I probably told this a million times. When I speak, I always talk about my grandfather and him, my grandmother, my mom, my aunt came from Kiev years and years ago. Went to Canada. He had a little bit of an accent, but he was like an amazing guy, and used to take me for walks in the park in Montreal. And when I was five-ish or whatever, and one day I asked him because he talked to everybody, and which is obviously where I got my DNA. And and one day I said, I called him Zeta, how do you know all these people? And I remember him pointing to this guy coming towards him. He said, "You see that guy?" One day I smiled at him, and he looked at me and smiled back. And he came over, and we started laughing. And then another person saw us and smiled and came over. I have my 5-year-old brain in my brain right now. I know exactly what I was thinking was, well, life's going to be easy. I just have to smile at people. Kind of relates to what we were just talking about technology and what stays in your mind. That was a positive, wonderful thing for me as a 5-year-old to feel, this is great. I just have to smile at people. Then you get older and you kind of screw it up a little bit and overcomplicate it, and then you get wiser and you say, it really is just maybe about a smile, and that's it alone. So, with that little story said, we all have lots of influencers. Can you share two or three people, known or not, that you influence you?
Wow. Gosh, there's so many people that influence me. I mean, a contemporary would be Ai-jen Poo, who created the National Domestic Workers Alliance and more recently Caring Across Generations. I remember when I was in college seeing her in a room talking about the importance of protecting workers and,
Yeah.
had no idea what her pathway would be. And years later, she has just done incredible work and made such a huge impact in ensuring that all workers, including domestic workers, have basic protections.
Is she the
That
Norma Ray of now? Norma, was it Norma Ray, that movie? Was it Sally Field that was the union like a
Yeah, yeah. Well, a little different, but not that different. Someone who cared about everybody. And when I was writing my book, there were so many inspiring women. One was Clara Hale, who was a mom of two who lived in Harlem and had to travel far for work, and her husband died when they were very young, and she didn't want to leave her kids, so she started a daycare. And she was so gifted at caring for children that this grew and grew. And a lot of families had to travel far distances for work in those days, and she would keep kids overnight. She ended up taking in foster kids. And later, when the HIV crisis broke out, she started tending to HIV infected babies, eventually opened the Hale House. And she was so good at what she did that, like,
oh,
the New York City Health Department went to her for advice. And, what I observed about her in my book was this contribution to the community and to the city wasn't just like a cute, nice thing, but it was fundamental. Without childcare, you don't have workers. Without workers, you don't have an economy. And so overlooking that type of care and concern or treating it as less important than other types of accomplishments, I just think was a mistake. And she inspired me. Um,
incredible, incredible.
yeah, incredible woman.
Um, anyone else? One other maybe?
Oh my gosh. I mean, Frances Perkins is another one I wrote about in my book. And
Mhm.
she, was someone who started out her career in what they called sort of consumer rights back then, but really was labor rights. And when I was fact checking myself in the book, I wrote about how she was trying to end child labor, and that was wrong. She was actually trying to make child labor less awful. She hadn't even imagined at that point that she could end child labor.
Oh wow.
But she did so much to improve the situation for workers that eventually, when FDR was elected, he asked her to become the first female labor secretary in American history. And she said, maybe. She's like, I'm not going to do it unless you agree that we fight for some basic things. We have to have minimum wage. We have to have a limited 40-hour work week. Young people, adults were being worked to death 70, 80 hours a week. She said we have to have workers' comp and we need universal health care because the only way we're going to have a strong society is if everybody can get taken care of. And he agreed, and she went there, and they got everything accomplished in the first term, except for universal health care, which decades later we're still fighting about. But anyway,
Oh my
um,
gosh, yeah.
she was so smart and deserves so much credit for
Wow.
the
That's amazing.
accomplishments
She
she's made.
sounds a little bit, I think her name was Marva Collins. I don't know if you've ever seen the Marva Collins story. I think it's Marva Collins. She started schools for kids that weren't doing well, and the government tried everything possible to close them down. And she wouldn't get any, she had to take the milk, she had to take the curriculum, she had to take, she wouldn't take because they weren't doing well. Long story short, I think they offered her to be the Secretary of Education, and she turned it down. She said she doesn't, she's got work to do and stuff, and amazing, amazing stuff.
Amazing.
I think it should remind us all. I say this a lot too, but it should remind us all that we're influencing people all the time, and most time you won't even know type of thing. And we actually have a choice of being positive or negative. Either way, it's going to influence them. So what the hell? Why not go the
Really
positive?
true. Really
So
true.
thanks for sharing all that.
Yeah.